All right. These are my lesson plans. There's the front page. Yes, I messed up a bunch. Here's my second page. I hope you can see that. If not, I'll be glad to send a picture. Okay, here we go. Let's begin with our visual drill. Say the sound you see. I am going to be the teacher and the student. So the teacher will be flipping the cards and the student will say the sound that they see. Duh. G. K. T. Mm. Oh. Mm. R. J. S. B. A. A. W. X. V. Z. Y. Qu. I. Ch. Sh. The. W. Okay. Now I will put my cards on the tray for the next part. All right. Now the teacher will let's see. So in this case, I'll be using my phoneme graphing chart. And the student will be writing on a piece of line of paper. And the teacher will call the sounds and the student will say the letter name and then underline as they say the sound. And this is both of us. The teacher says, B, and the student writes, not on a piece of paper, but on her little board. The student writes. Let's start again. The teacher will say, just making sure. The teacher will say the sound like B, and the student will say B, B, like this. And then erase it. And then the teacher will say two sounds for F. And the student will say PH and F. And then the teacher will say G, and the student will say G, G. And then the teacher will say Ch, and the student will say Ch, CH, Ch. Okay, let's come on down a little bit so you can see. Okay, let's do a few more. A, or A. Okay, I got that. Student will say the letter name and then write this in this, then the sound. Letter name and then the sound. So the teacher will say P, and the student will say P. P. Qu. Qu. Q-U. The teacher will say S, and the student will say S. S. And the teacher will say T, and the student will say T. T. And the teacher will say V, and the student will say V. V. The teacher will say W, and the student will say W. W. And the teacher will say X, and the student will say X. X. And the teacher will say Y, and Y, and the student will say Y. Y. All right. Now, it is time for our blending drill. And these are our words. And the student will say D, A, F. I'll do both the teacher and the student. Daff. G, A, K, gack. M, A, K, mac. M, A, T, mott. T, hot. R, raw. J, N, John. B, bop. W, wop. V, vip. Yes. Quiff. Shicks. Whiz. Which. With. Okay. Alrighty. Now is our skill intensive. For the first level, the teacher will say the vowel sound, and the student will say the vowel sound and put up a vowel stick like this. The teacher says ah, the student says ah. 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 Level 2, ag, and the student says ah. Op, and the student says ah. The teacher says ot, and the student says ah. The teacher says ab, and the student says ah. All right, we'll move on to our next level. Zag, and the student says ah. Pat, ah. The teacher says top, and the student says ah. The teacher says mop, and the student says ah. All right, and that's our vowel intensive. All right, let's introduce a new skill. Our new sound is Can you repeat it 3 times? And the student says, Okay, so we're going to find a key word for and that word is going to be umbrella. And we are going to make a list of the reasons and places that you might use an umbrella. And so the teacher will record a list as the students say things like rain, sun, outside, or a football stadium. And the teacher will ask questions like, well, why do we use an umbrella in the rain? What does the umbrella do for us? It keeps the rain off of us. But we also said sun. Does an umbrella keep the sun off of us as well? Yes, it does. And I myself have used an umbrella in a football stadium many a time. All right, now we're going to use our sand tray. Minus my sand because I spilled it. Okay, and the teacher will say, can you write you and say the new skill 3 times? And the student will say, you, shake, shake, shake. You, shake, shake, shake. You, All right, very good. So we take that away, and the student will get a piece of paper. And the teacher says, I'm going to give you some words to pound and finger tap. So the student will have their paper and pencil, and the teacher will say, pounder up, pencil ready, pounder up. Let's let you see my paper. Okay. The teacher will say, hub, and the student will say, hub, b. And the teacher will say, gun, and the student will say, gun, gun. And the teacher will say, shun, shun, shun. Okay. The teacher will say, yum, and the student will say, yum, yum. And then the teacher will say, chug, and the student will say, chug, chug. And then the teacher will say, this is a pseudo word, would, would, would. And then the last word is upon. Remember, it has more than one syllable. Upon. Pon. On. Very nice. All right. And then the teacher will say, can we read these words from a clean copy? And in this case, I'm going to use this as my clean copy. But I have a dry erase board on my wall next to my small group table, which I will use normally. And then the student will read each word. Hub, shun, jut, wood, gum, yum, chug, upon. All right, let's do dictation sentences. I'll say it once and you'll pound it. Here you go. Okay, and the first sentence is, his chum is such a cut up. Sorry, that's not the teacher part. The teacher says, his chum is such a cut up. His chum is such a cut up. And the student will say, his chum is such a cut up. And then write it. Alrighty, next sentence. Do not rub that cub. Do not rub that cub. And the student will say, do not rub that cub. Do not rub that cub. So the student will only do it one time. All right, now let's write that sentence. Do not rub the cub. All right, good job. And those are good punctuation marks and good capital letters I see. All right, let's read from the clean copy. In this case, I'm going to use this one. And here are my clean copy sentences on the bottom. And the students will say, his chum is such a cut up. And the next sentence, do not rub the cup. Okay. Now, our new skill introduction. Okay. So now let's introduce our new sound. Okay. And our new sound is Can you repeat it 3 times? And the student will say, All right. And our keyword, well, we've already done that. I just kind of skipped one part. No problem. We'll just put the back. All right. Now it's time for our red words. Excuse me on that one. Okay. So for our red words, we're going to load and arm tap these words. Okay. So the teacher is showing the word and the student will say, let's just put these over here so I can have the teacher part and the student part. So the student will say the word that the teacher is showing, and they'll pull their arm down to load it like this. Has. H-A-S, has. And the teacher will go to the new one. See. S-E-E, see. And. A-N-D, and. Okay. For. F-O-R, for. The. T-H-E, the. Okay. From. F-R-O-M, from. And you'll continue with the rest of the words, but I'm not going to for brevity's sake. Alrighty, that was our visual. Now let's go to our auditory review. I want you to load and arm tap these words, okay? The teacher will say the word, and the student will say the word and arm tap it just like they did before. All right, so the teacher will say of, and the student will say of, O-F, of. And the teacher will say she, and the student will load it and keep going. She, S-H-E, she. The teacher will say by, and the student will load it. By, B-Y, by. And the teacher will say do, and the student will load it. Do, D-O, do. Okay, now we have a new red word. And that word is saw. Like I saw a red bird in the garden. And then I'll say, can you use the word saw in a sentence? And the student will say, I saw the other team hiding behind the bushes when I played Fortnite or something like that. Okay, good job. All right, so we're going to count the sounds that we see in saw. Aw. How many sounds? 2. Yes, 2 sounds. Okay, and then I will use my little board like this to draw me some dots because there are 2 sounds. So I'll put 2 dots. Okay. How do we spell the sound of S? And the student will say with an S. So I'll put the sound of S. Okay. And then I'll say, well, how do we spell the second sound? Aw. They'll probably come up with several things here, but the sound of aw is written like this with an O. Okay. So our red word, this is a red word, so it doesn't get spelled the way it sounds. So let me show you how it's spelled. So the S is spelled with an S, and the aw is spelled with an A-W. Okay. So our red word is S-A-W. Okay. And here is my new card. A new red word card. Okay. Now, I want you to take your red crayon and write saw, 3 times on your bumpy screen. So the kids will have a little bumpy screen like this. And it's kind of fun. I've already done it. Okay. So the student will write and say each letter and then slide and say the word like this. S-A-W, saw. And then they'll do it a total of 3 times. S-A-W, saw. S-A-W, saw. Okay. So now take your card and we are going to load an arm tap 3 times. So the student will hold it like this where they can see the word. And we'll go. The student will say saw, S-A-W, saw, saw, S-A-W, saw, saw, S-A-W, saw. And then I'll say, can you finger trace those bumpy letters? And they'll take their little red word that looks really bumpy and they'll go S-A-W, saw, S-A-W, saw, S-A-W, saw. Now, can you skywrite your new word? And the student will say S-A-W, saw, S-A-W, saw, S-A-W, saw. All right, and then they will pull out their lined paper. Students, please pull out your lined paper. They'll pull it out. And with their red crayon, they're going to write the word 3 times on lined paper. S-A-W, saw, like this. S-A-W, saw. S-A-W, saw. Very good. All right, and the teacher will say, well, you've practiced the new word a lot, so flip it over and let's see if you can write the word saw from memory. We'll have their paper turned upside down. And I'll say, okay, write the word saw. And they'll say S-A-W, saw. And I'll say, that is just wonderful. Okay, let's use this word in a sentence. So I'm going to say the sentence 2 times, and then the student will write it. And that sentence is, I saw a tomcat on the tip top of the log. I saw a tomcat on the tip top of the log. And the student will say, I saw a tomcat on the tip top of the log. And then they'll write it. A tomcat on the tip top of the log. And I'll pay attention while the students are pounding it to make sure that these 2-syllable words get 2 bumps. Okay. All right. And then I'll say, students, can we read this from the clean copy? And for today, I have my lesson plan. And so, but I'll normally write it on a dry erase board and the students will read it. I saw a tomcat on the tip top of the log. Okay. All right. Now, that's it. All right. Sorry I had to be student and teacher, but nobody was available today. Thank you. Yes.